When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I never thought I would return to this country, not after all these years, not after the things I did here, and certainly not after the things I saw. But time has a way of gnawing at you, like water against stone, and eventually the sharp edges dull, leaving behind only a restless ache. Some men drink to silence that ache. Others bury themselves in family, in work, in anything that can fill the silence. For me, none of it worked. The silence always found me, in the middle of the night, in the smell of rain on hot asphalt, in the sound of distant thunder that too often resembled artillery. So when I turned 65 and my daughter asked me what I wanted for my birthday, I told her the truth. I wanted to go back to Vietnam, back to the land of ghosts. I did not tell her why. The first thing that struck me when I stepped out of the bus was the air. Heavy, damp, thick with the scent of wet earth and burning straw. It clung to me, to my skin, to the fabric of my shirt, like the country itself refusing to let me stand apart. The village lay in central Vietnam, tucked between fields of rice that swayed under the low sky like a sea of muted green. Beyond them rose the dark shoulders of mountains softened by mist. I remembered this place, not by name, not by map, but by feeling. The way the wind carried the echo of cicadas, the way the smoke from cooking fires curled lazily upward, bending in the same breeze that pressed against the back of my neck. It was here, somewhere in these fields, that I had crouched decades ago, rifle heavy in my hands, sweat burning my eyes, fear pounding in my chest. It was here that a younger version of me had learned what it meant to kill. The villagers stared when I arrived, not openly hostile, not exactly curious either, something in between. Children peeked from behind door frames, their eyes wide, then vanished when I tried to smile. An old woman sweeping dust from her doorway paused, leaned on her broom, and muttered something under her breath I couldn't catch. I had expected this. To them, I am not a tourist. I am a reminder. My face, my skin, my foreign tongue, all of it speaks of a past they would rather forget, yet cannot. I rented a room in a small guest house near the edge of the village. It was little more than a wooden house with creaking floors, thin walls, and a single bulb that flickered like it was already half dead. The landlady, a thin woman with a voice as soft as dried leaves, handed me the key without meeting my eyes. That night, lying on a bamboo mat under a mosquito net, I listened. The village was not silent, far from it. Dogs barked somewhere beyond the fields. The wind sighed through the trees, carrying with it the faint metallic rattle of wind chimes. But underneath those sounds was something else, something slower, deeper, like the steady beat of a drum, so faint I wondered if it was only my heart. It reminded me of the sound of funeral drums, the ones I'd heard so many times during the war, each beat heavy as a nail being hammered into wood. The next morning I walked the narrow dirt path to the center of the village. Old men sat under a banyan tree, drinking tea from chipped cups, their voices low. The smell of incense drifted from the communal house, where a small altar stood with red candles melting slowly into puddles of wax. I tried to ask about the incense, about the offerings, but my Vietnamese was poor, a collection of words half remembered from long ago. A young man translated for me in broken English. "It is for the spirits," he said, "for the ones without bodies." I frowned. "Without bodies?" He nodded once sharply, as if he had already said too much. It was later that same day when I first heard the phrase, I was buying a bottle of water at a roadside stall when two women passed by, carrying baskets of vegetables. They spoke quickly, but one word I caught clear as a bell. Jam Tang Kong Ngoy Chet. A funeral without a corpse. The words clung to me like smoke. I turned them over in my head all afternoon, whispering them beneath my breath. A funeral without a corpse. What did that mean? A symbolic ritual? A metaphor? Or something else entirely? That night, as I sat by the single dim bulb in my guest house, I remembered the faces, the ones from the war, men I killed, men I couldn't save, villagers who had vanished in the chaos, bodies swept away by flood, by fire, by bullets. How many of them had never been buried properly? How many funerals had gone without a body to mourn? The thought made my chest tighten. By the third day, I could no longer ignore it. I approached an elder, a man whose face was as weathered as the trunk of the banyan tree he sat beneath. His eyes followed me with an intensity that made me feel 12 years old again, caught stealing apples. When I asked about the funeral, he did not answer immediately. He studied me, as though measuring my soul against the weight of the past. Then he said in English so clear it startled me, "You came back at the wrong time, soldier." I opened my mouth, but no words came. He leaned closer, his breath carrying the bitter scent of betel nut. "This month is the 7th, Hungry Ghost Month. You understand?" I nodded slowly. I had heard of it, vaguely, the time when the gates between the living and the dead opened. He tapped his cane against the ground. "This village has a funeral every year. Always the same. No corpse, only coffin. But inside you will hear them cry." I stared. "Who?" His eyes narrowed. "The ones who never left. The ones who wait." That night I could not sleep. The air pressed against my skin, hot and stifling, carrying the faint odor of incense even through the closed shutters. I lay on my back, staring at the shadows that trembled across the ceiling as the bulb flickered. Then faintly, it began again. Boom, boom, boom. A drum. Slow, steady, deliberate. I rose, pressed my ear to the thin wooden wall. The sound was clearer now, coming from the direction of the communal house. With it came something else. The low wail of a woman, stretched thin as if carried on the wind. I thought of the elder's words. "Inside you will hear them cry." I should have stayed in bed. I should have turned on the fan, covered my head with the thin blanket, and waited until dawn. But my feet carried me to the door, out into the night. The village lay hushed, shadows stretching long under the moonlight. I walked slowly, each step crunching on the dirt path. The drum beat grew louder, the wail clearer, until I reached the square before the communal house. And there, under the pale moon, I saw them, a line of figures dressed in white, their heads bowed, their hands clutching candles that sputtered in the night air. At their center, men carried a coffin, lacquered wood gleaming dully in the half-light. But it was the sound that froze me. From inside the coffin came the cries. Low at first, then rising, twisting, like a chorus of voices pressed against the wood. Men, women, children, all weeping. I stood rooted, my chest tight, my heart slamming against my ribs. The villagers moved past me as though I wasn't there. Eyes empty, faces pale in the moonlight. The coffin passed within arm's reach. My hand trembled, lifting as if pulled by something unseen. And in that moment I heard it, clearer than all the rest, piercing through the wails. A voice calling my name. "Michael." Morning came heavy, as though the night had pressed its weight onto my chest and refused to lift. I woke drenched in sweat, the thin blanket tangled around my legs. For a few moments I lay there listening, half expecting to hear the slow drum beat again, or the voice that had whispered my name from inside that coffin. But the village morning was alive in its own way. Roosters crowed, dogs barked, children's voices rose in shrill bursts as they chased each other down the narrow dirt paths. Pots clanged, water sloshed into buckets, and somewhere nearby the smell of rice porridge drifted through the air. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Every ordinary sound seemed to carry an echo of the night before, as if the cries from that coffin had sunk into the soil, into the bamboo, into the lungs of every living thing here. I wandered into the square after washing my face in a basin of cool well water. My reflection in the water startled me. Lined, gray, eyes sunken. For a moment I thought I saw a younger version of myself there. 20 years old, helmet crooked on his head, lips cracked with fear. But when I blinked, it was only me again. Old Michael Harris. Tourist, stranger. The square looked the same as it had under the moonlight, but different somehow. The communal house stood tall with its tiled roof, faded red paint peeling from wooden pillars. The ground was littered with ashes from burnt incense sticks, wax from candles hardened into strange, twisted shapes. The coffin was gone, and so were the villagers. Had I dreamt it all? I turned in circles, searching for some sign of last night's procession. But there was nothing, only the banyan tree swaying slowly in the morning wind, its roots thick as serpents curling into the earth. It was then I noticed him, the elder who had warned me. He sat on the low stone bench beneath the banyan, a cup of tea in his hands, steam rising into the cool air. His eyes found mine immediately, as if he had been waiting. "You saw," he said in English. His voice was quiet, but it struck me like the crack of a rifle. I hesitated, then nodded. "I saw something." His mouth curved in a humorless smile. "This village remembers. Even when men forget, even when soldiers leave, the earth remembers. The dead remember." The words settled on me like dust. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't forgotten, that not a day passed when I didn't see the faces, when I didn't hear the cries. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I asked, "Why? Why a funeral without a body?" He sipped his tea, eyes never leaving mine. "Because there are no bodies to bury. Only water, only fire, only shadows left behind. But the soul cannot rest without the coffin, without the ceremony. So we give them one, every year. It is the only way to keep peace between the living and the dead." I sat beside him on the bench. The air was heavy with the fragrance of incense drifting from the communal house. My memories stirred, unwilling. I remembered the firefight, the screams, the sudden burst of flame when a hut went up. I remembered the river swollen with floodwaters, carrying away not only debris but people, arms flailing, mouths open in silent screams, swallowed by the current. I swallowed hard. Were they villagers from the war? His eyes were unreadable. Some, not only. Flood took many. Disease took more. But war? His gaze sharpened, cutting into me. War left the deepest wound. And you, soldier, have come back to stand on it. The shame flared hot in my chest. I wanted to say I was young. I was scared. I was only following orders. But excuses crumble in front of the dead. They always do. Children gathered nearby, their laughter strangely out of place in the weight of our conversation. They played with a rubber ball, bouncing it against the wall of the communal house. One of them, a boy no older than 10, stopped mid-game and stared at me. His gaze was intense, far too old for his small face. Then, without a word, he turned and ran into the shadows of the alley. The elder saw the exchange and said softly, "The children see clearer than we do." They were born with the cries still in their ears. I shivered. Later that afternoon, I tried to speak with the landlady of my guest house. She was sweeping the courtyard, the dry rasp of the broom loud against the stone tiles. "Last night," I began cautiously, "there was a funeral." She froze, broom hovering in midair. For a long moment she did not move, and I thought she might pretend not to hear me. Then, without looking at me, she said, "There is always a funeral in this village, every year." "But there was no body." She finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, dark, filled with something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Resentment. Both. "No body," she echoed. "Only the voices. You should not listen to them, Ong Mai. If you listen too closely, they will follow you. Her words struck like cold water. Follow me? She turned back to her broom, sweeping harder now, as though to erase my presence. Better you leave before the 7th month ends, before you are chosen. That evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky and the rice paddies glowed like bronze, I walked along the narrow dike separating one flooded field from another. Frogs croaked, dragonflies skimmed the water, and the air smelled faintly of fish and damp earth. A group of women worked in the fields, their conical hats dipping like white petals as they bent to cut rice. From a distance, their low voices rose in song, mournful and slow, a chant older than memory. I could not understand the words, but the rhythm pierced me. Each note sounded like a lament, each pause like a sob caught in the throat. My steps slowed until I stood motionless, listening, feeling as though the air itself thickened with sorrow. And then, just at the edge of hearing, I thought I caught it again. My name. Night crept fast in the village. Lanterns flickered to life, swinging gently in the breeze. Shadows lengthened, merging with one another until alleys seemed like mouths of dark caves. I ate dinner alone at a small table. Rice, pickled vegetables, fish grilled until the skin cracked. The flavors were sharp, earthy, grounding, but they did little to chase away the unease growing in my chest. When I returned to my room, I found the door ajar. I froze. Inside, the air was cooler than it should have been, as though someone had left a window open. The bulb above flickered weakly, then steadied. My bag sat where I had left it. My notebook lay on the table. But there, resting atop it, was something that had not been there before. A strip of white cloth. Torn, frayed at the edges, faintly stained with something dark. Tang cloth. Funeral cloth. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It smelled of smoke and river water. From outside, carried on the night wind, came the faintest sound, the beat of a drum. I could not shake the strip of white cloth from my mind. All day it weighed in my pocket like a stone, though it was light as air. Each time I touched it, the faint smell of river water rose to my nostrils, and behind it came the sound, the cry of voices pressed into wood, the drum beat steady as a soldier's march. I thought about throwing it away, burning it, but when I tried to leave it on the table of my guest house, I found it back in my pocket. When I tucked it into my bag, it returned to the pillow beside my head, so I carried it with me, like a talisman, though I did not know whether it protected or cursed. The village carried on as though nothing stirred beneath its surface. Farmers walked the fields, women cooked over small fires, children laughed as they splashed in the irrigation canals. But beneath it all was a tension I could not name. No one mentioned the funeral. No one mentioned the coffin. But when I passed, their voices fell silent. Their eyes followed me, narrow and sharp, and I knew what they saw. Not a tourist, not a traveler, but a ghost of the war come walking back among them. That night I sat on the porch of the guest house, smoking a cigarette I had promised my daughter I'd given up years ago. The smoke curled into the heavy air, carrying memories with it. I thought of the jungle nights decades ago, humid, thick with insects, the shadows alive with unseen eyes. We had smoked then too, though we'd cupped the glow of our cigarettes in our palms, afraid of snipers in the dark. The drum beat returned faintly, carried on the wind. My skin prickled. I ground the cigarette beneath my boot and rose. The air felt colder than before, though the day had been hot. Lanterns swung above the path, their glow pale and wavering. I followed the sound, each step heavy, though some part of me urged to turn back. The communal house loomed ahead, its roof line jagged against the moonlit sky. And there, they came again. Figures in white, drifting like shadows across the square. Women, men, even children, their faces pale and expressionless, their steps perfectly in rhythm with the drum. At their center, the coffin swayed, carried on the shoulders of 6 men. This time, I stood my ground. The cries seeped from within the wood, low and muffled at first, then sharper, more insistent, until I could almost distinguish words. My chest tightened. Then through the chorus, one voice rose clear. "Michael!" My blood turned to ice. The coffin passed close, and my feet moved before my mind could stop them. I reached out. My fingers brushed the lacquered surface, cold as stone, slick with condensation. For a moment the cries ceased, replaced by silence so deep it rang in my ears. Then, bang! A hand slammed against the inside of the lid. I jerked back, stumbling. The pallbearers did not falter. They marched on, eyes fixed forward, as if they had heard nothing. The mourners followed, heads bowed, voices rising in a low chant that made my skin crawl. I tried to call out, but my throat locked. The words came only in a rasp. The procession wound down the path toward the river. I followed, drawn like a moth to a flame. Mist rolled across the water, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The coffin was set on the ground, its bearers stepping back. The mourners circled it, their chant rising, falling, like waves against the shore. I strained to see through the mist, and then I did. Faces, half-formed, pale, pressed against the fog as though trying to break through. Eyes wide, mouths open in endless cries, and among them, one face I knew. A young Vietnamese soldier, no older than 19, eyes sharp even in fear. He had raised his rifle once, years ago, but my bullet had found him first. I had watched him fall into the mud, watched the life drain from his face. Now he stared at me from the mist, lips shaping my name. My knees weakened. I staggered back, but the strip of cloth in my pocket seemed to burn, anchoring me in place. The soldier's face melted into another. A girl, hair plastered to her cheeks with water, white dress clinging to her thin frame. I remembered her too. She had been screaming on the riverbank as the flood swallowed her. I had wanted to help, but orders had dragged me away. Now her scream echoed, endless, through the fog. The coffin shuddered. The lid rattled as if something inside pressed upward. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to turn my back, to pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't. The chanting stopped. The silence was worse than the cries. Slowly, the mourners turned their heads toward me. Every one of them. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, dark pools reflecting my fear. The elder stepped forward from the shadows, cane tapping against the ground. "You hear them," he said softly. "You see them." I tried to speak, but the words tangled. "They remember you," he continued, "and they are waiting." He gestured toward the coffin. My body moved against my will. I took one step, then another until I stood before it. My hand trembled as it lifted once more. The lacquered wood was freezing. Inside, the cries rose in a single voice. Not many, not dozens, not hundreds. One. My own. I don't remember how I returned to the guest house. One moment I was at the coffin, the next I was in my room, the door barred, my body shaking as though I had run miles. The strip of cloth lay on the table, spread flat as if placed carefully. Across its surface were words scrawled in dark ink. Vietnamese. I could not read them, not fully, but one I knew. A name. Mine. I sat in the dim light, heart pounding, sweat dripping down my temples. My mind tried to reason. Exhaustion, hallucination, memory mixing with reality. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The village remembered. The dead remembered. And now, they would not let me go. Morning sunlight spilled through the shutters, but it did little to drive away the heaviness in my chest. I had not slept. My hands shook when I reached for the tea the landlady left outside my door, the porcelain cup rattling against the saucer. On the strip of white cloth, my name still stared back at me. The ink had dried into the fibers, black veins and pale skin. I wanted answers, and there was only one place in the village that felt as though it might contain them. The temple sat at the edge of the rice fields, its gates low and simple, flanked by crumbling stone lions whose faces had weathered into unreadable expressions. A line of incense smoke drifted into the air, twisting as though alive. I stepped through the gate. The courtyard was quiet but not silent. Birds called from the bamboo, wind stirred the prayer flags, and somewhere deep inside came the faint tap of wood on stone, measured, patient, eternal. A monk appeared from the shadows. He was old, older than the banyan tree in the square, it seemed. His back bent slightly, his robe frayed at the hems, his feet bare. But his eyes were clear, sharp as glass catching the sun. "You carry the weight of the dead," he said in English, his accent soft but precise. I froze. You know me." He shook his head. "I know your kind. Soldiers who left pieces of themselves in this land, pieces that still bleed." We sat on the stone steps of the temple. He poured tea from a small clay pot, the steam rising like pale spirits. I cupped the warm bowl in my hands, though my stomach churned too much to drink. "They follow you now," he said quietly. "You walk too close. You touch what you should not touch, and so the veil has thinned." I clenched the bowl tighter. The funeral, the voices in the coffin. What is it? A trick? A ritual? What do they want from me? The monk tilted his head, studying me as though weighing the truth I could bear. "Every year in the 7th month, the gates between living and dead open. The hungry souls wander. Most are harmless, seeking incense, food, remembrance. But here," he gestured toward the fields, "here is different. Too many died without names, without graves. Some drowned, some burned, some buried where no one could find them. Their cries fill the air still. The villagers carry the coffin, so those voices have a vessel, so they do not consume the living." My mouth was dry. "But why did I hear my name?" His gaze sharpened. "Because you left voices behind too, voices that call to you still." I looked down at my trembling hands. The steam from the tea blurred my vision, but behind it I saw their faces, the young soldier in the mist, the girl in the river, my squad mates who had screamed when the mortars hit, their bodies torn apart before I could even remember their names. "I was just a kid," I whispered. "We all were. They told us. They told us it was necessary." The monk's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Necessary does not silence the dead." He led me deeper into the temple. Candles burned low, casting the wooden beams in red glow. The walls were lined with ancestral tablets, each one a name, a memory, a voice preserved. The air was thick with incense, so thick I could almost taste the ash on my tongue. "Do you see?" the monk asked. And I did. For a moment every tablet shimmered, and faces looked back at me. Dozens, hundreds. Some with calm eyes, others twisted in pain. They stared, not accusing, not forgiving, simply remembering. "You carry two burdens," the monk said, "the burden of what you saw and the burden of what you did. You cannot run from them by crossing oceans. You cannot bury them under years. When the drum calls, they will rise." My knees felt weak. I reached for the wall to steady myself. "What do I do?" I asked. The words cracked in my throat. "How do I make it stop?" The monk closed his eyes, and for a long time he said nothing. Only the tap of a prayer bead against wood filled the silence. Finally he spoke. "It does not stop, but you may face it. Stand among them when the coffin is carried. Offer incense not for strangers, but for those whose eyes you remember. Only then will you know whether they choose to release you or claim you." The thought chilled me. To stand again among those faces, to hear those cries, to risk being swallowed whole. But another part of me, buried deep, whispered that perhaps it was time. Time to stop pretending I had left the war behind. Time to listen to the voices I had silenced. I managed to whisper, "And if they don't release me?" The monk's eyes opened, clear as water. "Then you will walk with them, one more soul among the nameless." On my way out of the temple, I paused at the altar. I lit a stick of incense, watching the flame catch, the smoke curl. I whispered names, half remembered, fractured by time and fear. Nguyen, I thought. Fan. Lian. I wasn't sure if those had been their names, but they were close enough to the voices that haunted me. The smoke rose, carrying my words upward, and in the curling patterns, for a heartbeat, I thought I saw them nod. That night the air in the village was still, as if the world held its breath. I lay in my room, staring at the white cloth folded neatly on the table. My name glistened faintly under the lamplight. The monk's words circled in my head. Stand among them. Offer incense. Face them. But my heart whispered something else. Run. Leave while you still can. I closed my eyes. The silence was complete. No drums, no chants, no footsteps outside my door. And then, faint, so faint I could almost dismiss it, I heard the creak of a coffin lid opening. I returned to the temple the next morning, though every step of the path felt heavier than the last. I told myself it was curiosity, a traveler seeking to understand a foreign ritual. But deep down I knew better. I was being pulled. The monk was waiting in the courtyard. He didn't greet me with words, only a slight nod, as though he had known I would come. He led me inside, past the wooden beams and faded banners, to the altar heavy with ash and incense. He placed a bundle of sticks in my hand. Light them, he said. I did. The match flared, sulfur biting the air, and the tips of the incense sticks glowed red before settling into a steady burn. Smoke rose immediately, pale at first, then thickening, curling like liquid silk in the still air. Breathe, the monk whispered. The first breath seared my throat. The second filled my lungs with sweetness and rot, like flowers left too long in water. By the third, the temple walls seemed to fade, replaced by a haze that shimmered with shifting shapes. Faces. They pressed forward, emerging from the smoke as though the air itself remembered them. A boy, no more than 15, his uniform too large for his small shoulders. His mouth opened in a silent scream, one I had heard before, decades ago, when my squad opened fire on the riverbank. A woman clutching a baby, both eyes wide, both swallowed by flames that had roared higher than the rooftops. I remembered the thatched huts burning, the smell of kerosene, the way we had turned our heads because orders were orders. A soldier, mud on his cheeks, eyes burning with rage as he raised his rifle. I had pulled the trigger first. He dropped into the paddies, water rippling around his body, rice stalks bending with the weight of his fall. They looked at me now, not accusing, not forgiving, only present. The monk's voice came through the haze, low and steady. These are the ones without rest. Do not deny them. Do not turn away. Look and remember. I wanted to close my eyes, to shut it all out, but something stronger forced them open. Each face that formed was one I had buried in memory, one I had told myself belonged to another life, another man. But there they were. Smoke made flesh. Memory made breath. The boy stepped closer, his eyes wide with confusion. The woman's hair drifted like riverweed, her baby's tiny hand reaching. The soldier's mouth opened, and this time I heard his voice clear. You took me. The words sliced through me, raw and simple. I didn't mean... My throat closed. The smoke thickened, pressing against my chest, my heart hammering like a drum in the silence. You took me. The monk placed a hand on my shoulder. His palm was steady, grounding. This is not punishment. It is remembering. The dead do not vanish because we will it. They wait in silence until we see them again. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. I can't carry them all. You already do, he said. That is why you cannot sleep. That is why you came back. The coffin is not empty. It carries what you left behind. The smoke shifted again. This time it wasn't strangers. It was my squad. Danny with his crooked smile, the first to step on the mine. His body had been torn apart before I could even scream his name. Rodriguez coughing blood after the ambush in the jungle, whispering for his mother as I held his hand. Sergeant Hale barking orders even as the bullets tore through him. They were there, all of them, their faces shimmering, eyes hollow, mouths moving in words I couldn't hear. I reached out, desperate, but my hand passed through them like mist. The monk's voice was firm. They are not yours to claim. They walk their own path, but the ones who look at you, those are bound to you. I turned and sure enough, the boy, the woman, the soldier still stared, their shapes clearer than all the rest. Bound. The incense burned low, embers crumbling into ash. The faces began to fade, dissolving back into the haze. My chest ached with the weight of them, heavier than any pack I had carried in the war. When the last wisp of smoke vanished, the temple was silent again. Only the faint crackle of candles filled the air. I sank onto the floor, drained, sweat soaking my shirt. The monk studied me. Now you see why the funeral must be carried. Without it, the voices would tear the living apart. And now they have touched you. You cannot walk away unchanged. I didn't ask for this, I whispered. He gave a sad smile. None of us do. But the dead ask, and when they call, we answer, whether we want to or not. Outside, the sun blazed across the fields, bright and merciless. But the world no longer felt solid. Every shadow seemed to stir. Every sound carried an echo. Children laughed by the river, but beneath it I heard the gurgle of drowning voices. A farmer struck the earth with his hoe, but to me it was the thud of a coffin lid. The past walked beside me, step for step. That night I dreamed of smoke filling my lungs until I choked. Dreamed of hands clawing from the mist, pulling me down. When I woke, the strip of white cloth was pressed against my chest as though it had crawled there in my sleep. And faintly scrawled beneath my name, another word had appeared. Owe. The 7th month reached its midpoint. The air thickened as though the season itself were holding its breath. That evening, the monk came to my guest house. He carried no lamp, yet I saw him clearly in the moonlight, his shadow stretching across the courtyard like a second figure. It is tonight, he said. If you mean to face them, you must walk with the village. His voice left no room for refusal. The square was crowded when we arrived. Villagers stood in silence, their heads bowed, their faces dim in the flicker of lanterns. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, but even they did not make a sound. At the center lay the coffin, long, lacquered black, its surface shining as though slick with dew. The white cloths draped over it fluttered gently, though there was no wind. I felt the weight of the strip in my pocket, pulsing like a heartbeat. The drum began. Boom, slow, steady, echoing off the stone walls. 6 men stepped forward, lifting the coffin onto their shoulders. The mourners fell into line, a river of white moving through the night. The monk touched my arm. Go. I joined the procession. My feet felt heavy, each step measured with the drum. The villagers did not look at me, but I felt them aware of my presence, as though I had been expected all along. The cries began faintly. At first I thought it was the wind threading through bamboo. Then the sound thickened, rising from the coffin itself, muffled, desperate, like fists pounding against a sealed door. I glanced at the bearers. Their faces were blank, eyes fixed ahead. Either they could not hear or they had trained themselves not to. But I heard. I heard every sob, every gasp, every voice clawing from within. And then, once again, a word. My name. The drum quickened. The villagers' feet struck the earth in unison. Shadows stretched across the path, merging with the bodies until I could not tell who was flesh and who was smoke. At the corner of my vision, faces flickered, half seen, translucent. A soldier with mud still clinging to his cheeks, a girl clutching a doll, a man whose chest gaped open where shrapnel had torn him. They walked beside us. No one reacted. Not the mothers, not the elders, not the children. It was as if the living and the dead had become one body, flowing together beneath the moon. The river came into view, its surface gleaming silver. Mist drifted above it, thicker than before, curling around our feet like chains. The coffin was set down on the bank. The drum stopped. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear only my own breath. The villagers knelt as one. The monk gestured for me to do the same. I lowered myself, though my knees trembled. The elder stepped forward, raising a single stick of incense. He lit it, bowed 3 times, and planted it in the urn before the coffin. At once, the cries inside surged, filling the night. The mist thickened, coiling upward, and from it shapes formed. Dozens of faces, then hundreds. Some blurred, others sharp as memory. They pressed close, mouths open, voices merging into a wail that carried across the water. And again among them, the ones that stared only at me. The boy with too large uniform, the woman and her child, the soldier who had fallen into the paddies. Their mouths opened in unison. "You owe!" The word struck me like a blow. My chest burned, my vision blurred. "I didn't choose," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I was a soldier. I was following orders." The cries did not falter. The word came again, louder. "You owe!" The monk's hand pressed lightly against my back. "Offer it," he whispered. "Not excuses, not denial. Offer what you have, your breath, your memory, your grief. That is incense enough." My hand shook as I reached into the urn. The incense sticks trembled between my fingers. I lit one, the flame small and fragile. I held it before me. "I remember you," I whispered. "I remember your faces. I remember what I did, and I am sorry." The smoke curled upward, thin at first, then spreading, wrapping around me like a shroud. The cries softened, not gone but less sharp, like waves retreating after striking shore. For a moment the faces in the mist seemed to fade. The boy lowered his eyes. The woman clutched her child close, and the soldier turned his gaze toward the river. Relief surged in me, until the coffin shuddered. The lid rattled. Once, twice, then it slammed open. Darkness spilled out, thick as tar, coiling into the air. The cries returned, louder, wilder. The villagers pressed their faces to the ground, trembling but silent. From the coffin rose a shape, not smoke, not shadow, flesh pale and dripping, limbs twisted as though broken, eyes hollow but fixed directly on me, and in its mouth, my voice. I staggered back, my incense falling, scattering sparks across the earth. My legs refused to move further. The figure stepped toward me, dragging one foot behind as though chained. Its mouth opened wider, and my own scream echoed from it, tearing through the night. The monk's voice cut through the terror. "Stand firm. It is yours. The piece of you you tried to bury. Face it, or it will claim you." The figure lurched closer. I saw now its features were not separate. They were all of them. The boy, the woman, the soldier, the faces of my squad, twisting, merging, until I could not tell where one ended and another began. And at its core, my own younger face, eyes wide with fear, helmet tilted, rifle clutched. The soldier I had been. I fell to my knees, tears burning hot. "I know you," I whispered. "I know. I carried you all these years and I never spoke your names. I never mourned you. But I do now. I do now." The figure froze, its head tilted as if listening. I pressed my forehead to the earth. "Take what you need, my grief, my memory, my breath. But let me go." The silence stretched. Then the figure dissolved, collapsing back into smoke, drawn into the coffin until the lid slammed shut once more. The cries ceased. Only the sound of the river remained. The villagers lifted their heads slowly. The elder stepped forward, eyes fixed on me with something between pity and fear. "It is not finished," he said softly. "It has only begun." The monk's gaze was steady. "You faced it tonight, but the debt remains. Until it is balanced, the coffin will follow you." I stared at the dark box, my chest still heaving. My reflection shone faintly on its lacquered surface, warped as though the wood remembered my face. For the first time in years, I realized I might never leave this land alive. The village slept after the procession, but I could not. I sat in my room, the white cloth spread across the table. My name glared back at me, and beneath it the single word that had appeared on its own. Oh, no matter how many times I blinked, it was there, dark, permanent, alive. I poured rice wine from the bottle the landlady had left for me, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. I wasn't drinking for courage anymore. I was drinking to drown the sound of voices that still echoed inside my skull. At dawn, the monk came again. He entered without knocking, as if doors meant nothing to him. He looked at the cloth, at me, at the half-empty bottle. "It is heavier now, isn't it?" he asked. I laughed bitterly. "They say I owe, but I don't even know what the debt is." "You do," he said simply. "No." I shook my head hard. "I was 19. I didn't make the orders. My voice cracked. "I just followed them." The monk's eyes did not waver. "A sword is not guilty for cutting, but the hand that swings it cannot deny the blood. You did not make the orders, but you carried them out. You carried death. That is the debt." I slammed the bottle down, wine spilling across the table. "Then what do they want from me? My life, my soul. Should I throw myself in the river and be done with it?" The monk stepped closer, his presence steady as stone. "Not your death, your truth. They have been forgotten, their names lost, their faces blurred. That is the deepest wound, to vanish as if never lived. The debt is memory, the debt is voice. Until you carry them in the open, they will drag you down into the dark." I swallowed hard. "You mean they want me to remember them? To tell their story?" The monk nodded once. "Yes, speak them aloud. Keep them alive in words. That is incense more powerful than fire." That day I walked the rice fields, notebook in hand. The villagers eyed me warily, but no one stopped me. I wrote down every fragment of memory I had buried. The boy in the mist, thin, trembling, uniform hanging loose. The woman by the burning huts, hair falling across her face as she clutched her child. The soldier in the paddies, mud, fear, anger, and the look in his eyes when he realized he would never stand again. And my own men, Danny, Rodriguez, Hale, their jokes, their voices, their screams. The pages filled quickly, my handwriting jagged, as if the words burned my fingers. But memory is a dangerous current. Once you step into it, it pulls you further than you intend. That night I dreamed, not hazy fragments, but clear, vivid. I was back in the jungle, sweat dripping down my spine, rifle heavy in my hands. We had orders to clear the hamlet. Suspected enemy shelter, they told us. "Move fast. Don't hesitate." We burst into the huts, flames catching the dry roofs, children screaming. A girl ran with a doll clutched tight, and someone shouted, "Stop her!" Shots cracked. She fell. I remembered now. I had pulled the trigger. I woke with my chest heaving, the sheet twisted around me like a shroud. My fingers ached as though they still clutched the rifle. The word "Owe" glowed faintly on the cloth, as if lit from beneath. I pressed my palms against my eyes. How do I repay something like that? I whispered to the darkness. No answer came, only the soft rustle of wind through the shutters. But beneath it, faint as breath, I heard a child's voice. Not accusing, not forgiving, only there. The next morning, I went to the monk. He was sweeping fallen leaves in the courtyard, the simple rhythm of his broom steady against the stone. "I remember now," I said, my voice hoarse. "The girl, the doll, it was me. I killed her." The broom paused. He looked at me, sadness deep in his eyes. "And now you remember her. That is the beginning." I shook my head. "That doesn't change the fact that she's dead, that they're all dead." "No, he said softly, but forgetting would kill them again. Memory is weight, yes, but it is also offering. Carry it, and they may find rest. That evening I went back to the river. The coffin was gone, hidden away until next year, but I knelt where it had rested. I lit incense, the smoke curling upward, fragile and uncertain. I spoke aloud the names I could remember, the fragments I had written. I described their faces, their voices, their last breaths. The wind rose, carrying the smoke across the water. And in it, I thought I saw shapes, faint, translucent, but listening. For the first time, their eyes did not burn. They simply watched. As I walked back through the darkening fields, I felt lighter, though the word Owe still clung to me. I knew now what it meant. Not punishment, not vengeance. Responsibility. The dead were not asking me to die for them. They were asking me to live with them, to carry their memory into a world that had forgotten. But even as this truth settled into me, a chill followed. Because if memory was the incense they wanted, then they would never let me stop burning. The rain began the next morning. Heavy, relentless, hammering the roofs and fields until the earth turned to mud. I welcomed it at first, thinking maybe the storm would wash the ghost from me. But the dead are not so easily drowned. I wandered through the village, following paths I didn't recognize, until the land sloped upward toward a cluster of blackened timbers. The villagers called it the Old Hamlet, though no one lived there anymore. The war had burned it to the ground decades ago, and they had left it untouched since, like a wound that never healed. The rain hissed against charred beams. Ash still clung to the soil, darkening to paste beneath the water. And there, half buried, something caught my eye. It was small, a lump of cloth and scorched stuffing, stiff with mud. I bent down, my knees sinking into the mire, and pulled it free. A doll. Its head was cracked porcelain, one eye missing. The dress was torn, blackened by fire. Yet in the curve of its tiny arm, I recognized it. The doll from my dream, from the girl who had fallen. My stomach turned to ice. I held it close, rain dripping down my face, mixing with the sudden sting of tears. "How?" I whispered. My voice was lost in the storm. "How is this still here?" The doll's single glass eye reflected the gray sky. For a heartbeat, I swore it blinked. And then the world shifted. The rain no longer fell. The sky above brightened to a cruel burning sun. The blackened timbers were whole again. Huts with thatched roofs, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Children's laughter carried on the air. I was no longer in the present. I was back there. Back then. My hands gripped the rifle, not the doll. My boots sank into hot dust, not mud. The squad fanned out around me, their shouts cutting through the hum of cicadas. "Move in! Clear it out!" The fire spread fast, flames swallowing the huts. Screams erupted, and the girl, running, doll in her arms. I saw my younger self lift the rifle. "No!" I shouted, but the shot had already cracked through the air. She fell. The doll rolled from her arms, its porcelain face striking the earth. I gasped, stumbling back into the present, the rain pouring once more, the ruined hamlet silent. The doll was in my hands again, its broken face streaked with ash. I dropped it, chest heaving. My heart thudded like the funeral drum. From the shadows of the ruined huts, figures began to stir. At first faint, then clearer. Men, women, children, their clothes burned, their eyes hollow. They stepped forward, surrounding me, silent as the rain. And at the center, the girl. Her hair clung wet to her cheeks. Her small hand reached toward the ground where the doll lay. My knees buckled. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never forgot you. But I had forgotten. I had buried her face, her cry, her fall, under years of silence." The girl bent, lifting the doll in her small hands. She held it close to her chest. Then her eyes met mine. Not hatred, not forgiveness, only recognition. "You remember," she said. Her voice was small, trembling, but it pierced me deeper than any bullet. The others began to speak too, voices overlapping, echoing in the rain. My name? Don't let us vanish. Tell them we lived. I clutched my head, their voices pressing against my skull. The monk's words returned. The debt is memory. The debt is voice. But this was more than memory. This was demand. They wanted their lives spoken into the world, pulled from the ash, carried where time had tried to erase them. And they had chosen me as the one to bear it. The girl stepped closer, doll in her arms. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Instead, I felt it inside me. Her name. It seared itself into my mind, burning brighter than any dream. I gasped, speaking it aloud. The sound trembled in the rain, fragile but real. The girl smiled faintly. The others pressed closer, whispering their names, their final moments, their fragments of life. Each burned into me, filling me, until I could barely breathe beneath the weight. I repeated them, voice raw, the rain washing the words into the soil. When the last name left my lips, the figures began to fade. The rain fell heavier, blurring them into mist. The girl lingered, doll clutched tight. She looked at me one final time, then turned and walked into the ruins, dissolving into the smoke of memory. I collapsed to my knees, the mud sucking at my clothes, the notebook falling open beside me. My hands trembled as I scrawled the names, every letter a wound reopening. The doll lay before me, still burned, still broken. But now it was more than an artifact. It was proof. Proof that the past had not ended. Proof that memory had weight. I carried the doll back to the guest house, wrapping it in cloth as gently as if it were a child. The landlady's eyes widened when she saw it, and she quickly crossed herself, muttering prayers under her breath. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In the ashes," I said. My voice sounded far away. She would not touch it. She would not even look at it again. That night I placed it on the table beside the strip of cloth. The word Owe glowed faintly in the dark, and now beside it another word had appeared, as if inked by invisible hands. Names. I did not sleep that night. The doll sat on the table, its cracked face catching the lamplight, the empty socket staring into me. The strip of cloth beside it still bore the word Owe, but now beneath it shimmered a second word, as if written in dew. Names, I understood. The debt was not gold, nor blood, nor life. It was memory. The debt was to speak them, to lift them out of silence. At dawn, I carried the doll and my notebook to the river. The villagers were already gathered, as though they had known I would come. Women in white stood with incense. Men held drums. Children clutched their mothers but did not cry. The coffin was not there this time. Only the river, swollen from the rain, its current pulling hard toward the sea. The monk waited at the bank. His eyes settled on the bundle in my arms. "So you found it," he said quietly. I nodded. She gave me her name, and others. I wrote them all down. "Then speak," he said. "The wind is listening." I opened the notebook. The pages were warped from rain and tears, but the ink bled strong. The first name trembled on my lips. When I spoke it aloud, the air shifted. A hush fell over the villagers. The river stilled, as if holding its breath. And in the mist above the water, a face appeared. Faint, flickering, but there. A child, hair clinging to her cheeks. She looked at me with recognition, then faded into the current. Gasps rose from the villagers, but no one moved. I read another name, then another. Each time a figure formed in the mist, an old man with weary eyes, a mother cradling a child, a young soldier with mud-streaked cheeks. Each looked toward me, then dissolved back into the water, leaving only ripples. The villagers pressed their foreheads to the earth, whispering prayers. I kept reading. My voice grew raw, my throat burning, but I did not stop. With each name, the air grew heavier, as though the weight of decades pressed down upon us. The mist thickened until it swirled around my feet. The dead were gathering, At some point, the villagers were no longer kneeling. They were gone, or maybe they had never been there. The field, the riverbank, the very air around me was filled with shadows, hundreds of them, their mouths moving, whispering names into my ears. Some I recognized from dreams, others were strangers, but all pressed forward, begging to be remembered. I could not write fast enough. My hand cramped, my fingers smeared with ink, but still they came. Each name burned into me like a brand. The doll lay at my side. Its single glass eye glimmered. As I read the names, it seemed to breathe, the stuffing inside shifting, the porcelain skin twitching as though alive. At one point, I swear I heard it whisper too, a child's voice, soft but insistent. More, more. I turned the page and the words were already there, scrawled in a hand that wasn't mine. Names filling lines I had not written. The dead were writing through me. By the time the sun dipped, my voice was broken, a rasp barely louder than the wind. Yet the figures still pressed close. The monk touched my shoulder. "Enough," he said, "for today." I shook my head. "They won't stop. They'll keep coming." "They always will," he said, "but you are not the river. You are only the reed that carries the sound. Speak what you can. That is all they ask." His words steadied me, but the weight in my chest did not ease. That night the village was silent. No dogs barked, no children cried. Even the cicadas held back. I sat with the doll beside the lamp, my notebook spread open. The names stared at me, row after row, more than I could count. I whispered them again, one by one, until sleep finally claimed me. In my dream, I walked a narrow path lined with lanterns. Each lantern bore a name, glowing softly. The path stretched into darkness without end. Behind me, footsteps followed. I turned but saw no one, only shadows. Yet I knew they were walking with me, all of them. I woke before dawn, the air cold, my breath fogging in the dim room. The doll had shifted in the night. It now sat upright, leaning against the notebook. Its cracked porcelain lips seemed parted, as if about to speak. On the strip of cloth, another word had appeared beneath O and names. Remember. The next morning I stepped out into the village square, notebook in hand, the doll wrapped in cloth against my chest. The villagers looked at me differently now, no longer with suspicion, but with something heavier, pity or perhaps fear. They whispered as I passed, their eyes darting to the bundle in my arms, then away as though it burned them. I found the landlady sweeping outside the guest house. Her broom stilled when she saw me. "You should leave," she said flatly. I blinked. "Leave? Why now?" "Because you spoke the names. You've opened the path too wide. The wind carries voices again, louder than it should." Her words chilled me. "You mean the procession? The ghosts?" She looked around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Not ghosts. Ancestors. Strangers. Enemies. All the same now. They come every year, in the 7th month. We carry the empty coffin so they will not come into our homes. The coffin gives them a place to rest." I clutched the notebook tighter. "And the crying from inside it?" She shivered. "That is the debt leaving our throats. If we do not cry for them, they will make us. They climb into our chests, use our voices. That is why we wail. It is not theater. It is survival." I stared at her. "Then you've been doing this for decades? Every year?" Her eyes met mine, dark and tired. "Since the war. Since before you were born, maybe. The village remembers even when the world forgets. We carry what others refuse." Her words landed like a stone in my chest. I thought of the monk's voice. The debt is memory. The debt is voice. It wasn't only mine. The entire village had been conscripted into this silent service. Later that day, I went to the temple. The monk was there, kneeling before a line of incense that had burned low, their smoke curling like thin fingers. "You knew," I said. My voice echoed in the empty hall. "All this time, the village holds the dead for us. He didn't look surprised. You have seen the coffin. Did you think it was only for you? I stepped closer, anger rising. Why didn't you tell me? Why keep this secret? Because truth is a blade, he said quietly. Too sharp for most to carry. If you had known before, you would have fled. But you stayed long enough to hear them. And now the debt is awake again. I pressed the notebook into his hands. Then take this. Let the village keep it. I can't carry it anymore. He didn't even open it. He simply pushed it back toward me. No, he said. They chose you. Not me. Not the others. You. Why me? My voice cracked. Why not one of your own? Someone who belongs here. The monk's eyes were steady. Because it was your hands that pulled the trigger. Your eyes that saw and closed themselves. Your silence that lasted half a lifetime. Only you can break it. I left the temple trembling. The sun beat hot overhead, but I felt cold, as though shadows clung to me. That night I wandered the alleys. Doors were shut, lamps extinguished early, but from behind the walls I heard muffled sobs, entire families crying softly, in unison, as if rehearsed. It wasn't grief for the living, it was the ritual, keeping the dead at bay. For the first time I realized how deep the wound ran. Not just mine, not just the girls. An entire village chained to a memory they hadn't created, condemned to cry out for strangers year after year. The war had ended, but the mourning never had. I returned to my room and unwrapped the doll. Its porcelain face glimmered in the lamplight, cracked but unbroken. The strip of cloth lay beside it. Now 3 words marked its surface. Away. Names. Remember. But beneath them, new letters were forming, bleeding into the fibers as though written by invisible hands. Not only you. Sleep would not come. When I closed my eyes, I saw the procession again. The coffin swaying, the villagers weeping, the river reflecting faces that were not there. But this time, I stood among them, my mouth open, my own voice wailing with theirs. It was not mine. It was pulled out of me, forced up from somewhere deep, until my throat tore. I woke gasping, my chest aching, my lips raw as though I had truly screamed through the night. The doll sat upright on the table. Its single eye gleamed. And I knew then, the village's secret was not simply theirs. It was mine too now. The dead had bound me to them. The next morning as I walked through the square, villagers avoided my gaze. Some bowed their heads, others made gestures of protection with their hands. But one old man, his back bent with years, approached me slowly. His eyes were cloudy but sharp beneath the haze. You carry them now, he rasped. We can rest a little. Don't drop them. I wanted to ask what he meant, but he turned away before I could. Back in my room, I looked again at the strip of cloth. The words shimmered, alive, and I felt the weight of the village pressing into me, their voices, their cries, their unending duty. The dead had never belonged to one man alone, but now by naming it, I had pulled it closer, made it heavier, and I realized with a cold certainty, the next procession, the coffin might not be empty. It might be waiting for me. The 7th month crept closer. Each day the air grew heavier, as if the sky itself pressed down upon the village. Smoke from incense drifted even when no sticks burned. At night the wind carried voices, whispers so soft they might have been mistaken for leaves, if not for the way they called my name. Michael. Michael. I knew what it meant. The procession was coming again, and this time, the coffin would not be empty. I tried to leave. Truly I did. I packed my notebook, the doll, the strip of cloth. I walked down the dirt path toward the bus station on the highway, but halfway there, the road bent in ways it hadn't before. I walked for an hour, yet the same banyan tree loomed ahead each time I turned a corner. My chest grew tight. Finally, I collapsed on the roadside, sweat cold on my back. The landlady appeared then, as if she had been waiting. You cannot leave now, she said softly, not when the coffin has already chosen. I wanted to rage, to demand answers, but her eyes silenced me. They were not cruel, not mocking. They were sad. "This is not punishment," she whispered. "It is passage. The coffin must carry what is owed. If not you, then us again. And we are tired, Michael. We have carried it too long." I thought of the old man who had told me, "You carry them now. We can rest a little." Had they known all along this would happen? That night my dreams were fevered. I saw the coffin resting in the center of the square, its wood gleaming black, its handles polished as though waiting for hands to grip them. The villagers stood around it, their faces expressionless. Drums boomed in a slow rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. And from inside the coffin came a sound I knew too well, my own voice crying out. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears. The monk came to me the next morning. "You have felt it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. "It wants me." He nodded slowly. "The coffin is not death, Michael. It is memory given shape. To enter it is to be carried with them, to bear their journey, to keep them from vanishing. And if I refuse," my voice shook. He looked at me with something close to pity. "Then the coffin will take another. Perhaps a child. Perhaps the landlady. The debt does not vanish. It only shifts." I sat alone after he left, staring at the doll. Its single glass eye reflected me. For the first time, I saw not a soldier, not an old man haunted by guilt, but something else. A vessel. The strip of cloth had changed again. Oh oui, names, remember. And now, below them, lie down. That evening, the villagers began their preparations. Lanterns were hung across the square, their glow pale against the gathering dark. Drums were tested, incense bundled. Children watched with wide eyes but did not speak. When I approached, conversations died. Heads bowed, not in respect, but in resignation. The landlady pressed a bundle of white cloth into my hands. "Wear this," she said. "It is what we give the dead." My throat closed. "I'm not dead." Her eyes glistened. "Not yet." I sat in my room staring at the white garments until the lamp burned low. My fingers trembled as I touched the fabric. It was soft, clean, too clean, like shrouds waiting for the first stain. The doll sat beside me, the notebook open. The names on its pages seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, writhing like restless shadows. I whispered a few aloud, and the room chilled. They were waiting, not just for remembrance, for me. The night before the procession, the entire village gathered at the temple. Candles lined the altar, hundreds of them, their flames flickering like desperate hands. The monks stood at the center, chanting. The villagers responded, voices low, like an ocean tide. I felt every eye on me, some filled with sorrow, some with relief. I was the lamb and the savior both. When the chanting ended, the monk lifted his hand. "Tomorrow," he said, "the debt will walk, and it will be carried where it belongs." The villagers exhaled as one, as though they had been holding their breath for decades. That night I could not sleep. I lay on the mat, staring at the ceiling beams. Shadows gathered there, shapes of men, women, children. Their lips moved soundlessly, their hands reaching. When I closed my eyes, I heard the coffin lid creak open, a voice, my own voice, calling from inside. "Come, lie down, carry us." The words etched themselves into my bones. At dawn, the drums began, slow, steady, the heartbeat of the dead. I dressed in the white garments, each layer heavy as though soaked with unseen water. The landlady tied the final knot with shaking hands. "Do not be afraid," she whispered, but I was. As I stepped outside, the villagers formed a silent procession. At the square, the coffin waited. Its lid gleamed with morning dew, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift when I looked too long. This time, it was not empty. I knew it was waiting for me. The drums began before dawn, low, steady, mournful. Each beat thudded like a heart slowing toward silence. The sound rolled through the village, rattling the shutters, stirring dogs that did not bark. Even the birds felt quiet. I stepped into the square, wrapped in white. The cloth clung to me, damp from the night air, heavy as though already soaked in grief. The coffin waited at the center. No longer just wooden nails, but something alive, breathing in rhythm with the drums. Each exhale fogged the air above it, as though lungs lay within. The villagers lined the path. Their eyes did not meet mine. Some wept quietly, others pressed incense to their foreheads. None spoke. This was no longer their burden. It was mine. The monk approached, carrying a single lantern. The flame inside wavered, though there was no wind. "It is time," he said. His voice was gentle, almost kind. I stared at the coffin. "If I climb in, will I die?" He did not answer. Instead, he touched my arm. "If you climb in, you will carry them where they need to go. You will give them rest. That is all that matters." I wanted to ask more, but the words stuck. My throat was too tight, choked with tears I hadn't yet shed. The drums quickened. The villagers lifted the coffin onto their shoulders. It swayed, not empty, but waiting. They began to walk, and I walked with them. The procession wound through the narrow streets, past shuttered houses, past the banyan tree whose roots clutched the earth like veins. The morning mist clung to us, thick and gray, swallowing the sound of our footsteps. With each beat of the drum, I heard whispers rising from the coffin. Not just one voice, hundreds. They spoke my name, over and over, until it no longer sounded like mine, but something older, something carved into the wind. We reached the riverbank, the same place where I had read their names aloud, where faces had surfaced in the mist. Now the water was still, dark as glass. The coffin was set down. The villagers stepped back, forming a wide circle. All eyes turned to me. I felt my knees weaken. This was it. The monk raised his lantern high. "Michael," he said, "the debt must be carried. Only you can decide if it ends here or if it follows the children of this village another 100 years." The villagers' faces glistened with tears. Some nodded faintly, others pressed their hands together in prayer. Behind them, the mist thickened. Figures emerged, shadows of soldiers, women, children, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent plea. They waited for me. I stepped closer. The coffin's lid creaked as if sensing my approach, and then I heard it, my own voice from inside whispering, "Lie down, carry us, end this." The words shook me to the core. Was it an echo of my guilt, or had part of me already climbed inside long before today? I looked at the villagers, at the landlady who had shown me kindness, at the old man who had said they were tired, at the children who had never seen peace. If I refused, the coffin would choose another. Someone who had never set foot on foreign soil, someone who had never carried a rifle. Innocence chained to my silence. The choice was no longer mine alone. I placed the doll atop the coffin. Its single glass eye gleamed as if satisfied. The strip of cloth dangled from my fingers. The words shifted one last time. "Oh, names. Remember. Lie down. Rest." I climbed onto the coffin. The wood was warm beneath me, almost pulsing. I lay back, staring up at the gray sky. The lid swung shut. Darkness, but not empty darkness. Voices filled it. The cries of children, the laments of mothers, the groans of soldiers. They pressed into me, through me, until I was no longer Michael but a chorus of thousands. I tried to scream, but the scream was already part of them. And in that moment I felt something break, not in fear, but in release. For the first time in 50 years, the silence inside me was gone. When the drums ended, the villagers opened the coffin. Some say it was empty again. Others whisper they saw a figure lying peacefully inside, wrapped in white, eyes closed as if asleep. The truth, if there was one, slipped away with the morning mist. The procession ended at the river. The coffin was lowered into the current, drifting slowly until the fog swallowed it whole. The villagers bowed, their faces wet, but their voices clear as they chanted together. The debt is carried. The debt is carried. No one spoke of me again. Some claimed I boarded a bus the next day, notebook in hand, leaving the village behind. Others swore they heard my voice in the wind each seventh month, weeping inside the empty coffin. Perhaps both are true, perhaps neither. The landlady once told me that memory is heavier than stone, harder than iron. If so, then perhaps I was not buried, but freed. The dead had found their carrier, and maybe at last so had I. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.